wait a couple more minutes and then we'll get moving. We got Phil, we got Alan, and we got Charles. Fine.
And we have Morris.
What's that?
Morris.
Morris too? Okay, Morris too. Good.
Sorry, my mouth was full.
Alan, are you gonna be able to read for us?
If you give me a minute to finish eating chewing what's in my mouth.
No problem. No, we're not gonna start off with the reading
Are
anyway.
you-
We're gonna start, we'll start off with other stuff.
Well, wait. for a minute.
Okay, and what we're reading is what you sent out today?
Yeah, what I sent out today, we're not gonna be reading the whole thing. We're gonna be reading a part of it. And hopefully we can get the idea that I'm looking for us to get in reading a short part of it with a good discussion.
Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay,
It's Nancy.
no,
Nancy's-
Nancy might come, but Norma told me that she's not coming. She's
Okay.
gonna see her
Murray?
husband. Murray may or may not come, I'm not sure.
Coming back from the cookie.
Okay.
Didn't see them.
You gotta dip them in the herring sauce.
Funny, you should say that.
There's.
Is this, good morning.
Good morning.
Is this something different from what was sent out a day or
Yeah,
ago?
yeah, what was sent out a couple of days ago was a chopped up version.
No, I mean the one that's one complete thing came yesterday.
Yeah, that's right. No, the
That's
thing
the-
that I sent out today
Oh,
is the reading.
today. All right, I'll look for it today.
Yeah. It's just easier, well, you sent me something about that.
Yeah, but you sent the one piece, but now you sent something different even from that.
Yeah, the most recent one is what we're using.
Okay.
It's just,
All right,
It's easier.
let's start. I'm gonna review a little bit of what we've talked about for the last couple of weeks. The last couple of weeks, we've been talking about Dov Baer and Dov Baer's tract on ecstasy. Recall that Dov Baer was the son of the guy who put together the Chabad movement. And Dov Baer is really known for this tract on ecstasy, although it's interesting that we had somebody came and visited us last week and he knew who Dov Baer was, but he'd never heard of the Tract of Ecstasy, and he goes to a Chabad synagogue. So I assume that the Tract of Ecstasy is not something that's normal reading for the Chabad characters. I wanted to go into the Tract of Ecstasy just to start this, because I wanted to talk about something we call dialectics. And we've mentioned dialectics all the way through. And my contention is this Temunah that we're looking for has a dialectical manifestation. That's one of its manifestations. Remember, it's not a fixed thing, it's a process. And it is a dialectical process, amongst other things, by the way. So Dov Baer starts out essentially with an imaginative thing that he wanted people to try and meditate on. And this imaginative thing is you were to think of God as being surrounding you and filling you, surrounding you and filling you. And this you were to try and imagine. And then something might start to happen, which you might call a feeling of joy or a feeling of ecstasy or something. And then he had a huge system to be able to extend this feeling that you got through the initial meditation, to extend that so that it becomes more and more intense. And his system is actually a dialectical system. The system is the 5 levels of the human soul, not according to him, according to him, but also they're much earlier than him. Remember we talked about the nephesh, which is the sort of the physical, the most deeply physical, dark level of the soul, then the ruach, the breath of God, then the neshama, which is the feeling that these ruach and nefesh get, then the chaya, which is the life force, and then the echira. Now, the interesting thing, these 5 levels of the human soul, the bottom level is exactly the opposite of the top level. So the nefesh is exactly the opposite of the echira. The nefesh is purely material, purely material. The echira is purely immaterial. The nefesh is totally grounded. The echira is totally ungrounded. So you have 2 opposites on either side of this package that we call the human soul. And what was Dov Baer trying to do with these things? He created a system where what you were going to try and do, once you felt some inkling of this ecstasy, what you were going to try and do is you were going to try and increase the ecstasy by doubling the nefesh, ruach, neshama, chaya, and yechida. So, for example, you could have the yechida part of the nefesh. So the yechida, the nefesh can, and you have to use your imagination here. The yechida, the nefesh contains within it the possibility of the yechida. So that would be the yechida part of the nefesh. Each piece of this contains is not the correct word here, or assimilates or has something to do with the other parts. Now, what you're trying to do in his book, which is a long book, he's trying to be able to apply one level to the other level in what we call a dialectical manner, because he's applying them twofold. He's applying one to the other. Dialectics is the art of applying one to the other in a twofold way. So most of the time when we come up with dialectical things, we come up with things that are the opposite of other things, which is sort of the extremist form of dialectical thinking. So we come up with things like high and low. Now, if I mention these things, immediately you're going to be able to tell me they're opposite. What's the opposite of north?
South.
What's the opposite of east? West. What's the opposite of high?
Low.
What's the opposite of being?
Not
Not
being.
being.
Or nothingness? Okay. What's the
Not
opposite? What's the opposite of ascending? Immediately you have these things, because it turns out inside of us we do something what we call reflection. We reflect on the first thing. And as we reflect on something, we turn it into its opposite as if it's in a mirror. Okay, we have within us a capacity that's called reflection. And that capacity is also related to the Temunah. Okay, the reflective aspects of our mind are related to what we call the Temunah, or the image of the divine that's in us. The notion of reflection being something like that goes as far back in Western culture as John Locke, who was the first psychologist, who could not nail down the reflective part of the mind, okay? Had all the other things sort of labeled nicely. When we came to the actual act of reflection, he couldn't get it. He said, in fact, there was some sort of divine thing that's in us. So the thing that allows us to pick off opposites, to see that this is bigger than this, that this is different than this, etc., is the reflective part of our mind. And it's called reflection because it's as if you're looking in a mirror and right turns into left. Remember, right turning into left. Something turns into its opposite in the process of looking at it. And that is really the essence of dialectical thought. It doesn't necessarily have to be the opposite, but it has to be something different from it. The opposite's the most extreme version of it, where things are absolutely contradictory. Anyway, Plato was the master of this. His writing is the mastery of turning things into either their opposite or either they're negative, or turning right into left or left into right. And that's why it's so difficult in the beginning to be able to really grasp what he's saying, because you have to train yourself by reading it to be able to think it through. So what Alan's going to do is he's going to start off, and Alan, take a look at the page that I sent you, which is page 171, the first page that starts off, yes, he said.
Yes, he said, that is strange to hear. And what's more, I said, besides these, all the things said to be goods, corrupt it and tear it away, beauty, wealth, strength of body, relatives who are powerful in a city, and everything akin to these. You see the type of thing I mean? I do, he said, and I would gladly learn more precisely what you mean.
Hang on for 1 second. These are goods, good things that turn things bad. Okay, that's a turn. Okay, that's a turn in thought. That is a dialectical notion. Some good thing is going to turn things bad. Now, what he's talking about here, you haven't read the whole thing in the past. What he's talking about here is the philosopher. He's talking about, right now, he's talking about the evolution of the philosopher in the city of the Republic. The philosopher is actually the key person in the city. If you don't have the philosopher, you cannot have the good city. You cannot have the city with the philosopher in charge of it. So right now he's talking about the philosopher. And he will go through talking about different characters in the city. And he will end up talking about the tyrant. And it turns out, of course, that the philosopher and the tyrant are related to each other. And you will see how the philosopher and the tyrant actually come from the same nature. And so Plato has this all arranged in the forms of opposites. And as you think about this, as you go for this in your mind, you'll be able to see this. Okay, Alan, keep going.
I do, he said, and I would gladly learn more precisely what you mean. Well then, I said, grasp it correctly as a whole, and it will look perfectly plain to you. And what was said about them before won't seem strange. What do you bid me to do, he said, concerning every seed or thing that grows, whether from the earth or animals, I said. We know that the more vigorous it is, the more it is deficient in its own properties when it doesn't get the food, climate, or place suitable to it. For surely bad is more opposed to good than to not good.
Okay, see if we can understand that. Who wants to take a shot at that? Nancy?
All right, I was struggling with this last night. It seems to be saying that everything that has life, right? Because it says that seed or thing that grows, right? So it has to be alive. It has to be animate.
Okay, but he's also talking about the philosopher. Okay, he's talking about the nature of the philosopher of this. He's talking about seeds, but he's talking about the philosopher.
Okay, so the stronger it is, the more it is able to be corrupted when it doesn't get fed properly.
That's right. That's right. That's
Or
exactly
taught.
right.
properly.
Right. So the stronger it is, the more the stronger the nature of the philosopher is, the more likely it can turn into being a tyrant. He will get into if it's not raised properly. So the philosopher and the tyrant, according to Plato, will come from the same nature. So there's a singularity of nature behind both the philosopher and the tyrant. That's really an interesting dialectical twist. So the philosopher turns into, remember we use the word turning a lot. The philosopher turns into the tyrant if he's not raised properly. What do the words mean? Because for surely bad is more opposed to good than to not good. What is that? What did your thinking tell you about that, Nancy?
Good to not good. Well, what's the opposite of good? There's so many opposites of good. I mean, it could be evil. It could be rotten. It could be viable. Not viable. It could be good is just too vague.
Okay, but good has strong opposites. What about not good? He said he's using good, not good, good and not good, and bad and bad.
Bad, sure.
So not good is not part of that game, right? So
Right.
something that's really, really good, like the philosopher's nature, in a not good environment, will not do as badly in turning into a tyrant as in a bad environment. Is that right? And a not just not good. Not did I get that right?
All right. Let me see if I can rephrase it.
Okay, so go ahead, see if you can get that.
Okay. So a philosopher in a good environment is going to do well, but a philosopher in a bad environment will descend and become a tyrant, is what you're saying. Is what this is saying.
Right, but what about the not good part?
Okay, so bad is more opposed to good than to not good. Well, isn't not good bad? I mean,
no, he's not good is sort of neutral.
It's different degrees.
Oh,
all right, somebody else.
I would-
somebody else take a swing at it.
but not good, but I mean, that's too, you're talking about dialectics, the bad and the good, and then there's the not good, which is sort of, is that neutral?
Maybe. What do you think, Phil?
I think, can I be heard? I'm not sure.
Sure, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, what Nancy is struggling with is planted there in the text, it seems to me.
Mhm.
Like Plato here with his character Socrates is playing with maybe, he's either confused or he's deliberately eliding a certain distinction. Now, we have this text, which is probably a reasonably faithful translation, but to say one thing is opposed to another, there's two different things there. It can be the contrary, good and not good. They seem to be contraries. Something, and we say something can't be both itself and the contrary. But when you mentioned East and West before, that was a different kind of opposition.
That's a contradictory.
That was contradiction, or it was. I'm not sure now which is which, but it's a different thing. It has a quality, one against the other. Good and evil is one of Nancy's examples, as opposed to good and not good. And we'll see that over and over again. So when you get to being and not being, that's a huge problem in in philosophy. Is not being a bad thing, or is it just a negation, a sheer negation? So I'm not sure.
But good is good and not good.
Yeah.
Good is sort of, not good is sort of the absence of either good or bad. Okay, so if the philosopher is raised in sort of in a not good environment, he might or might not become a tyrant. If he's raised in a bad environment, he probably will, according to this. By the way, I wouldn't take anything he says so completely seriously here, because this is written in order to get us to think differently. This is written in order to teach us the art of dialectical thinking. That's the main thing it's written for. It's also, there's a huge amount of content to it, which is very interesting. Anyway, keep going, Alan. Let's keep reading.
Of course. So I suppose it is reasonable that the best nature comes off worse than an ordinary one from an inappropriate rearing. Yes,
Everybody
it
get
is.
that? Everybody, now, as we read this, we have to read it with a comprehension, so we have to really understand what he's saying here. Everybody get that, what he said? Okay, keep going.
Yes, it is. What we say, won't we say for souls too, Adamantus, I said, that similarly, those with the best natures become exceptionally bad when they get bad instruction? Or do you suppose an ordinary nature is the source of great injustices and unmixed villainy? Don't you suppose, rather, that it's a lusty one corrupted by its rearing, while a weak nature will never be the cause of great things, either good or bad? Yes, he said, that's the case. Well then, I suppose that if the nature we set down for the philosopher chances on a suitable course of learning, it will necessarily grow and come to every kind of virtue. But if it isn't sown, planted, and nourished in what's suitable, it will come to all the opposite, unless one of the gods chances to assist it. Or do you believe, as do the many, that certain young men are corrupted by sophists, and that there are certain sophists who in a private capacity corrupt to an extent worth mentioning? Isn't it rather the very men who say this, who are the biggest sophists, who educate most perfectly, and who turn out young and old, men and women, just the way they want them to be? But when do they do that? He said. When, I said, many gathered together, sit down in assemblies, courts, theaters.
By the way, he's talking about our education. Okay, this is essentially the educational system that many of us have here that he will get to. Okay, go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt.
Okay, where many gathered, sit down in assemblies, etc., and with a great deal of uproar, blame some of the things said or done, and praise others, both in excess, shouting and clapping, and besides, the rocks in the very place surrounding them echo and redouble the uproar of blame and praise. Now, in such circumstances, as the saying goes, what do you suppose is the state of the young man's heart? Or what kind of private education will hold out for him and not be swept away by such blame and praise, and go borne by the flood wherever it tends, so that he'll say the same things are noble and base as they do, practice what they practice, and be such as they are.
Okay, so he's introduced more opposites here. He's got blame and praise, he's got noble and base. The thing is loaded with opposite concepts, okay, opposite concepts, because he's playing with these. He's playing them against each other. And as Socrates plays them against each other, now you know, it isn't only the play of these opposites that allows you to climb the ladder of dialectic. The ladder, you have to be going in a direction with them. Well, Socrates has a direction he's going in. Okay, Socrates is the philosopher in these dialogues, and the philosopher is flunked right at the echidna, okay, using the Dov Baer thing. The philosopher has a direct connection to the good or the God, whatever you want to call this. The Greeks call it the good. And Dov Baer would call it the yechida, which is some sort of spark of God. So Socrates is aiming his discussion towards the good. That's where so Socrates can always be counted on in whatever thing he's doing and whatever play of opposites that he has to be aiming his discussion in that particular way. So you can trust him for that. He's not about to be sending you somewhere to a very negative place. That doesn't happen. He'll talk about them, they're very negative places, but he talks about very negative places from his position as being in this high place.
Why is he allowing space for the gods to intervene?
Well, because Socrates also does not, he has this good that he's attached to, okay? Has this good that he's attached to. Later on, earlier on, the good is related to envision the sun. Okay, in vision, when we see things, the light of the sun is sort of a metaphor for the good. It's a physical metaphor for the good. So Socrates is related to the good in this way. Now, he does not know. Socrates never speaks of some attribute of the good other than it's being good. Okay, he doesn't know anything about the good. He is like Dov Baer, who really doesn't know anything about the yechida, okay, that he's aiming for. So, and the problem is, and the problem is to say anything about this. You'd have to say anything about this, you'd probably be speaking somewhat incorrectly, because to say anything about it, you'd have to split it into two. Okay, you'd have to start talking about it. You'd have to say, I say this about this thing, and there's an I that's doing the saying, and this is what I'm saying about it. So I'm essentially splitting it into two. If I'm going to keep the unity of the thing, I have to keep my mouth shut about it, okay? I have to keep my mouth shut about it. So Socrates does not ever give you a definition of what he's talking about when he talks about the good. So that could be a god too, okay? He doesn't know that it isn't a god, even though the Greeks had a different relationship with the thing that they call the good as the Hebrews do with the thing that they call the god. Okay, there's a completely different relationship, and I think that's mostly because of a guy named Moses that came around, although I'm not clear about that. Moses had directives that came from God. Now, Socrates has no directives that come from the good. Okay, there's no directives that come from the good in the Platonic world. But there are directives that come from the God in the Hebrew world, and that's really a big, huge difference. In Socrates's world, one gets to the God through education, through different forms of education, starting as a youth with gymnastics, and then the learning of music, the learning of poetry, and then branching off to rhetorics, dialectic, grammar, and then to algebra, geometry, astronomy, and music and astronomy again. Anyway, these were sort of the key features of Greek education that could potentially create somebody who was communicating on a regular basis with the good and would bring this communication down to the world in the form of a perfect city, okay? In the Hebrew thought, we don't have that. We have a prophet who is said to communicate with the good, and there are different levels of prophecy. Maimonides, I think, has 12 levels of prophecy, the highest being Moses, who communicates with God what is called mouth to mouth, without using any poetry language or other kinds of things. He's really directly connected to him. Socrates is directly connected to the good, but they come off talking about it in very different ways. they come off, Socrates says nothing about the good. Moses has a lot of things that he says about God. Okay, a lot of things that he says about God. Anyway, let's keep reading. Let's see how far we get here, and then we can clear it. We're reading on the top of page 172.
Okay, what these educators and sophists inflict indeed when they fail to persuade in speech. Or don't you know that they punish the man who's not persuaded with dishonor, fines, and death?
Yeah,
Yes,
you remember Socrates died because he
Corrupting
was-
the Athens.
yeah, they say in the mysteries that he died so other philosophers don't have to die in the cities. Okay, so Socrates taught the philosophers essentially to keep their mouths shut and mind their own business. Okay, so because if they talk too much, if they're speaking to especially the young men, and we'll get to the kind of young men, to the good-looking guys, to the smart
They
guys.
thought that he was corrupting the young people.
Right, but he was doing exactly the
Right,
opposite
of
to them.
course.
Okay, his notion, he was taking young people who he thought already were corrupted, and he was trying to steer them in another direction. So here's a guy, his name is Jimmy, and he's really a smart guy, and his dad wants him in the business of selling horses. And Jimmy's listening to Socrates on the street, and Jimmy's slowly losing his interest in the selling horses business. So the father is going to be quite upset with that. And that's the reason that Socrates gets nailed, essentially, is because he is in fact changing the minds of the youth of Athens and pointing them, if they have the capacity, in the direction of being philosophers. Okay.
David, I had a thought, I don't know what, this works directly what we're talking about, but I was just thinking about the idea of, the good and bad. And I was thinking about the idea of having a banana. When you get a banana and it's ripe and you want to eat it, but then it starts getting spots on it, and then it's not as good as it was when it's ripe. But then at the end, you can use it for banana bread. So it's not all bad, but it's just not as good as it was. So I'm just wondering whether, when you say, there's not bad and good, does that kind of fit into what we're talking about?
We are for sure. But what we're talking about is our ability to think in terms of oppositional things. Okay, we're trying to reflect on how it is that we are loaded with oppositional concepts, oppositional cognates in our minds, and we can go back and forth. And people like Socrates go back and forth a lot between, let's say, the good and the bad, or being and nothingness, ascending and descending, creation, and what's the opposite of creation?
Destruction.
Evolution, or something like that. All of these things have opposites. Our language is loaded with that. And as we play with these opposites in our mind, we are doing dialectics. Okay? And as we play with these opposites in our mind and we try to understand, how is it that so many opposites are there? And what's behind that? What's behind the fact that there's so many opposites there? Can you get to a place where the opposites disappear? And Socrates would say, yes, the opposites go away when you're in touch with the good. Okay, because he would say that the good generates all of these opposites. So from the good, just like when we were looking at the Tao Te Ching, and we were looking at the way nothing from nothingness came something. So from the good comes all of the opposites. So what you can do if you're like us and we're sort of born, we've been taught this language, we can use the language as a tool to ascend to the thing that is sitting in the center of the language, which is for Socrates the good, and for Dov Baer would be called the echeda. Okay, if you spend time fiddling with this in your head, it's a fiddling thing, you know, you're sort of fiddling around with it in your head. If you spend time doing this, something will change inside you. I can't guarantee it, but probably you'll get to something interesting. Now, Nancy, we would say, well, we're using the intellect when we're doing this. That's right. We are using the intellect to do this, but what we arrive at the end of the use of the intellect is something that seems to be outside the intellect. Okay, the good or the echida seems to be outside the intellect. So what we're looking for, and this was the whole notion of leaving the cave. You want to leave the structure of the intellect by using that same intellect to climb out of itself. Okay. And for people who are intellectual, that's the easiest way. That's the easiest way to be able to transcend yourself, is to use your own intellect to be able to jump out of yourself. And once you're out of yourself, well, you should check it out. You know, take a look around. You might see something that interests you. You know, who knows what you're going to see or what you're going to feel. But you have to be ready to see or feel something quite unusual. Do you want to keep reading?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so I think, or you don't know that they punish the man who's not persuaded with dishonor, fines, and death. Yes, he said, they punish very severely. So what other sophists or what sort of private speeches do you suppose will go counter to these and prevail? I don't suppose any will, he said. No, I said, but even the attempt is great folly. For a character receiving an education contrary to theirs does not, has not, and will not become differentially disposed towards virtue, a human character that is, my comrade, for the divine, according to the proverb. Let's make an exception to the argument.
Okay, this is a very unwieldy, this is Harold Bloom, by the way, who's translating this. Harold Bloom is he's a Leo Strauss translator. Leo Strauss is sort of my guy, okay? I'm in his camp as far as translation is concerned. The Guide for the Perplexed that I read was translated by Leo Strauss and Shlomo Peens. The point, their translation takes the Greek word and it has one English word that it uses for that Greek word in every relation of that Greek word. So it never uses synonyms. Okay, so some of this stuff sounds very, very odd, but the idea is with translation, how do we get the real sense of what the guy who wrote this, namely Plato, really meant if we're using synonyms that we pick ourselves just because they sound good in English. Anyway, so what do you think he's saying in that paragraph there? What is he saying there? He's saying there, for a character receiving an education contrary to theirs, contrary to the sophists who are trying to impose themselves on them, has not and will not become differentially disposed towards virtue. A human character, okay, so is he saying that the sophists will not be able to budge in the person that they're trying to, the person's virtue? Is that what he's saying, or is he saying the opposite of that? It's hard to know. It's hard to know. What's he saying there? Is he saying that virtue is sort of a fixed thing? That independent of the kind of education you're going to get, it's still going to be there? I'm not sure. A human character that is my comrade for the divine, according to the proverb. Let's make an exception to the argument. Anybody got an idea what he's saying there? Phil, what do you think he's saying there?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I think it's quite problematic, but you made it more difficult, if I may say so, by skipping that semicolon, because he's distinguishing between the human and the human assisted by the divine. I'm not saying this explains it all, but he says there, he was talking about a human character who receives an education contrary to theirs. And by the way, if Alan Bloom is using contrary as to stand for a different Greek word than the word opposite that we saw before, then I just don't know quite what he's doing. But for a character receiving an education contrary to theirs, will never become differently disposed toward virtue. He'll have the same attitude toward virtue, I guess. He'll have a different audience or a different pressure on him. That is, he's just talking about a human character, and then he throws in the possibility of the divine being an exception because there's a story that Socrates was touched somehow by the divine, which I think is being alluded to here, but I don't know.
Okay, so we don't know exactly what he means.
No, we don't have to. I don't think so.
Okay, we don't know whether.
But you mentioned that Socrates is somehow in touch with the good. I don't know, but I thought he's looking for it. But
I think by this time he's actually found it. We have to give him that. You remember in the beginning part of the symposium, before that dialogue begins, Socrates is said to be meditating out in the field, following the track of the sun, and he's out there for 12 hours. Okay, and they hold the symposium up because they want him to finish whatever his meditation is. But Socrates, at least for my money, was in touch with the good, I'm not sure if that's unbelievably unusual or whatever, but I think there's a good chance that he was in touch with the good. Anyway, Alan, do you want to keep going?
Sure. Can we get to the page?
You should be well.
You should be well aware that if anything should be saved and become such as it ought to be in regimes in this kind of condition, it won't be bad if you say that a God's dispensation saved it. I am of no other opinion, he said.
Okay, so it looks like the attempt to get him to drop his virtue, which is unsuccessful because a God saved him. Okay, that's what I think they're meaning from that, which is an interesting thing for the Greeks to say that, for Socrates to say that there's a huge attempt to take this guy who potentially could be the best of men, and he's given over to the sophists to try and change him into a regular city dweller. And the sophists work on him for a long period of time, but he still doesn't change his sense of virtue. And they're talking about Phil says, because he's touched by the divine, this particular guy. Go ahead, Alan.
Is he? I'm the last sentence. It won't be bad if you say that a God's dispensation saved it. So is he telling? Is he being told to go ahead and just make something up or to lie in order to save himself, in effect?
But no, they're just discussing the possibility for, these two guys, Socrates, and I think it's Glaucon here, Adeimantus, they're discussing the possibility, what happened in this situation where the guy still ended up with his virtue at the end. Okay, and they don't have an explanation for that, because from their perspective, it's very difficult to understand how that could happen with all of the convincing that's being forced on this character to try and change his ways, to not aim for the good, but aim for some other thing, aim for being a businessman, aim for being something else other than the philosopher. They don't have an explanation for that. And then they say, it won't be bad if you say that a God's disposition saved it. Okay, so that's one possibility. And the guy who's talking to Socrates says, "I am of no other opinion," he said. So that, and by the way, these are opinions that they're sharing there. These are not facts of knowledge. And you should know that the Greeks, and especially Plato, has a big section on the difference between opinions and knowledge. Okay, opinions is to opine something is a mixture of knowledge and no knowledge. To know something is to know that you know something. To know something is something very, very special. But most people that he will talk about are mostly into sharing opinions. So this is an opinion. I am of no other opinion. This is an opinion that God saved him. So nobody knows for sure.
Can I offer a kind of friendly amendment to what you just said? Knowledge is always true if it's knowledge, and the way they saw it. I think opinion could be right opinion. It could be entirely consistent with knowledge, like a theorem in geometry. But if you don't understand it, if you don't have the knowledge, then you're just reciting an opinion. It's not the same in that respect of what it's founded on. So I have lots of opinions about the theorems in geometry, but I have long since forgotten how to prove them. Okay, so it's just a matter of opinion. That's all I wanted to.
Right. Okay, keep reading, Alan.
I am of no other opinion, he said. Well, then I said, besides that one, be of this opinion too. What? That each of the private wage earners, who these men call sophists, and believe to be their rivals in art, educates in nothing other than these convictions of the many, which they opine when they are gathered together, and he calls this wisdom. It is just like the case of a man who learns by heart the angers and desires of a strong beast, of a great strong beast he is rearing, how it should be approached, and how taken hold of when, and as a result of what, it becomes most difficult or most gentle, and particularly under what conditions it is accustomed to utter its several sounds, and in turn, what sort of sounds uttered by another make it tame and angry. When he has learned all this from associating and spending time with the beast, he calls it wisdom, and organizing it as an art, turns to teaching, knowing nothing in truth about which of these convictions and desires is noble, in or base, in good or evil, or just or unjust. He applies all these names following the great animal's opinions, calling what delights it good and what vexes it bad. He has no other argument about them, but calls the necessary just and noble, neither having seen nor being able to show someone else how much the nature of the necessary and the good really differ. Now, in your opinion, wouldn't such a man in the name of Zeus be out of place as an educator?
Okay, let's
Yep.
stop there. Let's stop there. So in this particular section, here is a guy. This is for Plato's money, the typical sophist who learns something about the workings of either a human being or a wild animal. He starts with a wild animal, but it could be a human being, and gives everything that he does certain values. And these values that he gives to the actions of this particular being are done not only to control the being, but also to point the being in some direction. He wants the being to behave in some ways. And how different is this from our education, from our own educations, okay? And how do we ever get out of that? How do we ever withdraw ourselves from all of these things that we've been taught are good or bad? And how do we separate? How do we separate the necessity, the things that are necessary for living, from the things that are actually good for living? And anyway, and what you guys should do if you continue to be interested in this, you should, if you want, I can send you, if you ask me to, I will send you the full Alan Bloom's translation of Plato's Republic. And you might just take off a couple of years and really study it and spend a lot of time with it, and it'll change you. If you end up reading that with comprehension, Phil is saying you have to know it. Okay, you have to know it. You don't have an opinion about it. You know it, and you know it because your intellect clicks on it. You know it because the way you know certain things in the intellect, where it somehow fastens on it in a way you say, aha, that's what it is. Anyway, this is really in my opinion, this is really worthwhile stuff. And this helps if you're on the path of trying to get to the Temunah. Okay, the Temunah was what the whole class was about. If you're on the path of trying to get to the Temunah, then you leave no stone unturned. Okay, and one of the stones you don't leave unturned is learning a little bit of dialectical logic, dialectical thought, and you spend some time on that. And
so, David, I'd like to make one very short comment, if I may.
Sure.
So, I'm inclined, as you know, to put this all into very mundane and practical terms. So as we've read this section, I'm reminded of the current political discourse that's going on in our country at this time. So all of these words of Plato remind me of how we need to be thinking about the current political discourse that's going on in our country at this time.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, we are living in what Plato would call a very debased form of government. The highest form of government is where the philosopher who does not want to rule, in fact is forced to rule, and is threatened with his life if he doesn't want to rule. He doesn't want to rule because he's ruling people that he would rather not hang out with. Okay, he's ruling people who anyway. What he's doing is he's in touch with the good and he's letting all the good flow down. The next level of this is called the timocracy. This is where the ruler has pride. The ruler seeks out the position because he wants to rule. He has pride. It serves his ego. Okay, he runs for office. This is the next level of debasement. The next level of debasement Plato calls an oligarchy, and that is where the men with cash, the men who own things, run the culture. And the worst level, when there's huge factions all over the place, he calls a democracy, where the demos, which is what we've got, where the demos of the mob runs things. And the prize, Plato spends a lot of time in the notion of freedom. And the big thing that you get in a democracy, what makes it very, very appealing to most people, philosophers especially, by the way, if they want to live incognito, is democracy, you have personal freedom, okay? In all these other forms of government, personal freedom you may or may not have, but in a democracy, you pretty well have personal freedom as long as you obey the law. And so we live in a democracy, but we've got pieces of it that are a timocracy. So people run for office because they are loaded with pride and they want to be admired. We know some people like that, but everybody's like that. All these guys are running for office. They say when they're asked, does somebody want to run? Everybody raises their hand because everybody wants to be president, right? Anyway. It's good to read this because it sort of settles you down a little bit, and you think about the levels of government and how they've descended. Although our life is not bad at all. Okay, I'm not saying our life is bad. Murray raised this as an interesting issue, and we know that there's lots of foolishness being cast around in the air. Any other comments, questions? I have one thing I wanted to show you guys, which is a picture my wife is insisting that I show, and I've got to show it. Okay, here we go. Can you guys see this picture here?
Yeah.
When she was talking about her out-of-body experience, it was after gazing at a lot of stuff like this. And these are some of the photographs. I mean, just the coloring, the beauty that was so overwhelming in the Bouchard Gardens when we visited there a few years ago. Anyway, so this sort of took her breath away, and in fact took well, she's never been the same. You know, after that experience, she seemed to be a little bit out of the world.
I see why. I see why.
Yeah. Here, I'll show you another picture. This is her. These are her relatives. They look so.
My sister.
Yeah, this is the sister and the brother-in-law. But the colors of these trees are just wonderful.
It looks like it's exploding above them.
Yeah, here's another shot.
Sounds like my wife. She enjoys exactly that.
Well, how can you not enjoy that? That touches something in you.
Yes, it does.
And we didn't get to the part where in this dialogue coming up soon, where he's talking about ideas that, for example, is beauty an idea? Is beauty an idea? Or they're just multiple instances of things that are beautiful? And so Plato spends, you know, his notion is the good spawns ideas. The good spawns ideas. One of them is the idea of beauty. The other is the idea of justice, okay? And these particular ideas are things that we don't only have instances of, but we actually, if we work ourselves into it, we can actually maybe get close to the idea of beauty itself. And something like this might be close to that. Anyway, that's the story. All right, you guys, we're coming to a close here. We've got maybe one or two more. We'll see. Maybe next week will be the last one, and then we'll let it go. I'm trying to decide, but I think next week will be the last meeting, and then we'll have a week to recover and get back into the realm of the usual Hebraic stuff that the rabbi is giving us. but we've taken this sojourn into the area of strangeness that I delivered to you guys for the last 2 or 3 months. Anyway, we'll see everybody next week, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
And
much.
thank you for the
Very
beautiful
interesting.
pictures.
Thank
Really.
you,
Sure.
David.
Okay, bye-bye.
Have a good week, everyone.
You too.
Yeah. Uh-huh. We don't have any beliefs in it, he just want to win. Based on species arguments. Okay, so. Yeah, things for sure doesn't have any beliefs. No. No. Because it killed now he believes in God. Before that, I don't think he believed in God. Not really sure that he still whether he does believe or he's just saying that he just says everybody's expecting it and he'll put him some votes. Right. Exactly. The reason you didn't get it is you were not, for some reason, it was just sent to Charles and me, so